Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Graham from Matrixx Software, Director of UK Engineering, based here on the park. I'm talking about cloud native, and it's about 5G, and it's the deployment technology used for 5G. Telecoms is going through a bit of a sea change. Some of us have been in it for like years and years. It's kind of the same old thing. With 5G, it's now different. It's adopting kind of web technologies. Before I start, I'm going to call out, I brought a team of experts today. So I've got Paul over here in our marketing department, Ashley, Ryan, and Rob. So if you have any other questions at the end and you're mingling, you can ask them about the technology, as they know all about it. Okay, so 5G is introducing web technology into the deployment. I find this quite interesting and it's quite exciting. I've been in telco for a few years, and yeah, it's been pretty much the same, but suddenly it's become exciting with all this new stuff. And maybe we can get the next generation involved. The other day, I was trying to get my kids involved, and somebody told me, telecom is something your dad does. So hopefully that will now change with all this new technology coming on board. Okay, so I'll dive into 5G. Maybe this has been overdone recently, but it is the biggest change in telecoms for a long time. It's all about completely changing everything from radio to the way the packet call is deployed, to introducing new concepts like latency and slicing, which we'll talk about a bit later. But it is introducing web-scale technologies into deployment. So there might be some of you here, and this is about looking at opportunities, who aren't in telecoms and thought, oh no, I can't do telecoms because it's all that kind of other stuff. People think about SS7 and diameter, et cetera, et cetera. You need lots of experience. 5G is about introducing completely new technologies into mobility, okay? So all the good stuff you probably know about, like web services, REST, Kubernetes, all that stuff is now being used to deploy 5G networks. And whatever industry you're in, this is now an opportunity, okay? So you might be in software, and it's an opportunity to get into 5G. There's also many other aspects of 5G, that things you couldn't really do before. We never said that, but you can't in current generations. So you might be in other industries like hospitality, finance, entertainment. It suddenly opens up all these opportunities, okay? So today is just a bit of a taste. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the new tech, and hopefully it gets you thinking, and you can sort of take it on further later. Okay, so a brief intro to cloud native. What exactly does cloud native mean? Right, some of you might know, some of you are thinking, well, what is this? When we say cloud, you think of things like Amazon and Azure and your apps out there. It's not really about that, I have to say. Okay. This is kind of like a generic list, so people know about microservices, deployment in small pieces of functionality, REST, everybody's heard of REST, container-based environments, Kubernetes, which is like the word of this year. You'll hear a lot more about that going forward. CI/CD. Some of you in software probably say that's old hat, but this is now being introduced in the telecoms. And in telecoms, traditionally, it's long-lived projects that take years and years to get going. We want to introduce these concepts into telecoms so we can deploy things quickly, put out quick functionality, and really reduce the risk. So no longer do you have these kind of 6-month, year-long projects of implementation, leave it running for years and years, come back to it a few years later, right? In 5G, it's about pushing out changes quickly, using CI/CD concepts taken from the web industries. And it's deployed in public and private clouds. So cloud really means the infrastructure you deploy the applications into, okay? It's kind of managed by the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is under the Linux Foundation. And at Matrixx, we're members of this. And at the moment, we're influencing the telecoms aspect. So we are involved with some of the standardization, the definitions of cloud native, and its use in 5G. And that's active at the moment. And we'll talk a bit about that later on how we can get involved and how people on the park here can get involved with the foundation as well. So one of the aspects of this is something called Kubernetes. Who's heard of Kubernetes? Yeah, okay, great, everybody here, most people, because you're probably from the software industry. Okay, so it came from Google, managing large-scale web apps. I think Google has about 2 million containers under management at one time. So they needed something to manage all these applications being deployed, scaled up, scaled down, the rest of it. It was, they had something called Google Borg in Google, and it got written as Kubernetes and then released. It's a Greek word for captain or helmsman, and it's about container orchestration. So where you deploy containers, resource scaling, and managing healing and HA. And there is a logo. Does anybody know why it's got 7 spokes? No? 7 and 9 from Star Trek. 7, okay? They managed to keep the connection between the two. Okay, so the point of this is bringing together cloud native and 5G. So people in the software industry might have not had as much visibility of 5G. So we'll quickly go through what 5G brings. Okay, of course it's going to bring more bandwidth, otherwise we wouldn't be doing it. So we're talking like gigabit plus downloads. For me, the most interesting one is low latency. If you pick up your phone and go on a 4G network and try and download a web page, you'll notice it takes a bit of delay as it's downloading. You try doing a speed test on 4G somewhere and on Wi-Fi, and you'll notice quite a big difference, right? 4G networks and all mobile networks have a lot of latency, right? And unfortunately, that's because the way we did things here 20 odd years ago when we created IN and we centralized control of the network, and mobile adopted that process. So things became very monolithic. So when you go on a 4G network on data, you go to the cell tower, you go to backhaul, you go to the breakout gateway somewhere else, you then go onto the internet, right? That introduces lots of latency, and 5G is about removing that latency by putting your device close to the cell tower, and the packet call is then as close as possible, in theory, okay? Edge deployments. So that's how you reduce latency, and suddenly control applications become possible. And when people talk about 5G, that's the bit they don't really discuss. But that's quite key to the opportunities that can come to you, okay? Suddenly you can have control, augmented reality, those kind of things, because the application that's serving your phone is near as possible with low latency, right? There's an idea called slicing, and previous generations, you've heard this as policy. It's about QA, but this is more right through the network now, guaranteeing quality in the core, on the radio, and in the networks. High device density. Try going into the centre of London or in a stadium or a concert and using your phone, and it will crack. It just won't work, right? Lots of problems. So 5G and the new radio technology introduces the possibility of high device density, and that's why it's associated with IoT. If suddenly you can have lots of millions of devices on the network without too many issues. The technology chosen to deploy 5G is web scale and cloud native. Okay, so I'll hammer that home. If you're in software, you now have an opportunity to get involved in 5G. And what we're not really seeing at the moment, we're seeing a lot of deployments and how you deploy 5G, but we're not really seeing people coming through in the next generation of apps into these networks, right? That's where the opportunity is. This is a technical thing, so cloud native functions replacing virtual network functions. Previous generations, stuff was deployed as VNFs virtualized. Now it's CNFs, which is lightweight virtualization, okay? That's key to deployments. So, yeah, 5G is more about faster speeds, okay? We've got to stress that. It's not just more. you're thinking, I can download all this video on my phone, why do I need faster speeds? It's more than that. It's about industrial automation, self-drive cars, we heard drones. The early adopters of 5G, though, has been enhanced mobile broadband. And that's because, we have the issue in rural areas getting connectivity out there with fiber, that sort of thing. I know in the US, a lot of the original trials have been enhanced mobile broadband, and that's a big opportunity. Massive IoT, I guess we still have to see that happen, but that'll probably happen over time. The business cases for that still has to stack up. But you can put many more devices on a 5G network than you can exist in, and that's why people talk about IoT and 5G. And of course, down here, ultra low latency. So that brings in your control applications and things like augmented reality and virtual reality come into it. But this kind of thing, I guess we hear all the time. It's the kind of low latency, I think, is the interesting bit here. Okay, so bringing all this together, so we have cloud native deployment, we have 5G technology, and it's all coming together. I borrowed this slide from a colleague, and it's quite good, I think. It's quite topical if you're following Picard at the moment. So bringing together web-scale technologies into mobility presents. Okay, so it's all commodity. Everything in the network now is commodity, okay? Over the years, when we started here years ago, you'd have been building your own hardware, and the big guys like Ericsson's and Nokia would have built their own hardware and deployed on their own hardware. It's all x86 now in clouds. So that barrier is gone to entry as a supplier. It's using standard software techniques. So I'll be shot for saying this, but I think in some of the software, now you don't really need to be an expert. People with the kind of web skills can now come in to the industry and build things, including the 5G core. Everything is hyper-focused, and that means we're now moving away from that monolithic approach to building mobile networks, right? So in the old days, say cell towers, node Bs, switching, HLRs, it's all monoliths, right? Now all that kind of, the equivalent functions in 5G is now distributed right across the network, depending on the type of application you wish to deploy. So maybe aspects of it is still monolithic. Maybe the voice part, telephony, that can still be based on a monolithic structure. Your control applications, you may want to push them out to the edge. And it goes right out to like your own 5G networks. Yeah, so scaling, that's a technology from Kubernetes and containerization. You no longer have the kind of dimension deploy based on your worst case scenario like you used to have to. Midnight on New Year's Eve was always the case we deployed for, because that was the worst case of the year. So you had to have a load of hardware in the network ready for that to go, even if most of the time you didn't need it. Now you can kind of scale as you need to, and you're sharing resources in clouds. And that's because hardware is now gone from a CapEx purchasing hardware to an OpEx play. So you're kind of acquiring computation as you need it, and that's key to this. And we're using all the good HA and fault-tolerant capabilities of cloud and Kubernetes now as well. Back in the day, we would have had fault-tolerant hardware, these kind of tin sheds with everything duplicated. And now we've got to the point where everything can be duplicated in the network, and the healing takes care of by things like the Kubernetes and the containerization. And it's all driven by APIs which are based on REST, right? So gone are SS7, SIGTRAN, diameter, those sort of things. Everything is now based on REST, which means anybody who wants to can get in there in the network and use whatever you want, really. Dig out all the analytics, apply AI techniques to predictive computation, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's really open, and this is where the opportunities are, right? Anybody can jump in there. Right, so the other thing is slicing. Again, it's about the right thing for the right job. So a slice is a piece of you're reserving capability all the way through the network now, from radio to backhaul networks to the applications. So now you have the ability to say, I want to deploy this web service. I want to give it this kind of performance, give it this resources, and I want to dedicate it to mobile broadband, because we want to guarantee people at home have guaranteed bandwidth. IoT, maybe that's not so important, right? Maybe IoT is about having millions of devices providing telemetry, and things like latency isn't so important. It's important that the data gets through at some point, but it's not like low latency. And that requires different kind of network capabilities, right? You require access to devices, but you don't require so much bandwidth on those things. And you've got ultra-low latency, where you are looking at things like gaming and medical and industrial control. And it's important those applications have guaranteed access to the network. Otherwise, these concepts don't work. Right? So you have a ultra-low latency slice for that. And then other stuff. And I can guarantee there's stuff in 5G that none of us have ever thought about will end up taking over 5G. Just like it happened with smartphones and 3G and everything else in every generation since, right? Something else will happen that becomes big we haven't predicted yet. And because those of us in the industry are actually more focused on deployment of the networks, where if somebody comes in new, you don't have to worry about deployment of the network. You can think higher on how am I going to use all these capabilities? And in terms of computation, the same idea. The basics of the mobile network you might want to put in the core. That's not important to distribute, but your industrial control, your medical applications, right? Your gaming, you might want to put them on the edge of the network. So places like here in Martlesham, you could have a data center with cloud stuff and have 5G deployed there servicing the site because it needs that capability for whatever's going on here. Then you have the kind of things in between. So it becomes a problem now where and how you deploy your services and where you deploy them for your particular type of application. So that needs to be thinking about. And that's why you do it, because different types of applications require different types of computation resource. So at the moment, standard stuff is in the core, it's all in the core in 4G. But as we develop applications that require low latency, then you push it out onto the edge where you need the response times as quick as possible. Okay, so this is the emerging business models, and this is where things get a bit wacky, and we try and sort of stimulate what's going on. This is some ideas, I've borrowed them. But I'd say to everybody, think beyond this. What can you do with 5G once you've got low latency, high bandwidth? You can put your own services out there. What can you do with that? It extends capability of a smartphone, because effectively you have your smartphone, then you have something quite close to it. So think about apps and the capability in the edge network for building new services. So extended reality, I guess that's replying to virtual reality, augmented reality. One of the use cases we have at the moment is in a stadium. You're watching your favorite games, and your phone is adding stuff onto the match. So you're watching it, but you're still being fed information. That's the augmented reality use case. I'm not sure if we're going to be walking around headsets all over the place, but certainly, some augmented glasses. I see the contact lens use case, those sort of things. And think beyond smartphones, right? 5 years, 10 years time, will people still have smartphones? Will it be built into the environment? Yeah, trust. We're still very primitive, aren't we? We still use passwords. Phones try and do it with facial recognition. It doesn't really work very well. When you've got things out there that can sort of identify you as a person, it's getting very 1984, but how can we use that to establish trust? Immersive interfaces. So getting away from smartphones, but having things built into environments. Other ways, the contact lens thing, all those sort of things. How can you use all this bandwidth and low latency? The fact you have computation almost next to you that you could use for your devices. Digital reflection. I had to look this one up myself. Basically, it's about overlaying stuff onto creative arts, I think, in any creative process. So how can you use let technology help with performance or design or anything where you're sharing ideas? Across people, different locations. Maybe this is topical now at the moment, where you're trying to collaborate with people, but you're not in the same room as them. And the obvious one we've been talking about, industrial automation. So working autonomy. So in factories, farming, agriculture, managing harvest. All this stuff is possible now. And this network gives it, you can now stick it out there. And the low latency aspect is important right there. I mean, can Wi-Fi do it if you're out in the fields or factories? With 5G, you're kind of guaranteeing better latency, better security. So it's all about trust as well. And connecting everything. We think we're connected, but let's think about it. We're not really that connected. I mean, you're at work, you're on a Wi-Fi network, you drive home, you're on 4G, you might be on 4G, some of you might lose connectivity. You get home, you're on your Wi-Fi. It's all broken, right? The idea is you're connected all the time with 5G, and you're connected to everything. So the opportunity there with absolute connection. So think about how you, and whatever industry you're in, how you could exploit this. So you've got low latency, you've got reliability, you've got trust, better security, distribution of networks, and think beyond smartphones. Think about environments, wearables, the rest of IoT. And of course, because we're a charging company, we have to charge for it somehow, okay? So we're looking at creative charging models and how you can make money out of this. Somebody's got to make money out of this. How do you monetize all these things? So you've got to have something in there kind of taking the money. So where are the opportunities? So developing low latency apps to deploy into or next to the 5G core on the edge, right? That's the biggest opportunity I'd see. Anybody who's in the web scale, in Kubernetes, but not in telecoms, it's your big opportunity to jump in there and start doing things, right? 5G networks are being deployed. We don't see too many players in the advanced application side at the moment, okay? So this is where you're going to come into it. So we'll be looking at augmented reality, industrial control, gaming, autonomous cars. That's the cliche, but it might happen. Things do happen quickly. Private 5G networks. It's an opportunity to build your own networks for certain applications. And think beyond smartphones or wearables and device built into the environment. And interestingly, I was reading about Max von Sydow dying yesterday, so triggered the Minority Report, because he was in that. And so, yeah, these kind of interfaces are there and can be used, okay? So you've got to think beyond it, what we have today for the opportunities. All right, so we're almost there. So I'm going to give a plug for future events. So we are working on bringing Cloud Native Computing Foundation event to the park. Actually, we got some acknowledgement this morning, I think Ashley, yes, from Brandon. So Cloud Native Computing Foundation will sponsor events here now. We can go more into the details of what this is about, rather than just the ideas. We can bring speakers in all the spaces that, and if anybody wants to speak at these events, they can do. So we're looking at experiences in cloud native tech, security, AI, 5G, those sort of things. We're targeting the 7th of June at the moment. I think he said that's okay. Yeah, so we'll go for that. That's quite big. Cloud Native, they own Kubernetes, and they're behind KubeCon, okay? So at the moment, their work is cut out because they have just had to cancel KubeCon in Amsterdam. It'll be pushed out later in the year. But we'll work with them to bring those kind of events here. So we're building up from the 2-hour meetups, all-day events, hackathons, plug fests, and you never know, one day you might have KubeCon here on the site. How we get 12,000 people here, I'll have to work that one out. Right. We've also got Innovate Suffolk Hackathon coming up. So last year, who's here? Yeah, Chris is here. I'm going to stand up, Chris. Chris is part of this. Chris here, yeah. So we're doing a Innovate Suffolk Hackathon. We did it last year. We did, it was on mental health apps. That was very successful. Stress Buddy came out of that, associated code to us up here. This year, it's end of March, and we're doing outdoors and agriculture. So it's all primed for 5G stuff, okay? So everybody's going to come along and build their 5G outdoor and agriculture apps. Harvest, bird spotting, all those sort of things. Grow your own stuff. So we want to make that a big success, just like last year. And I've written a big piece up on the site, so it's about I've given it a 5G angle. So that's all ready to go for the end of March. So sign up to that. It's great. And yeah, in the future, we can talk about this, but not for today, okay? We'll dig deeper into the architecture and where the opportunities are. And anybody in telecoms looking at it go, oh, it's all changed. Yeah, it's all changed. But that's where the opportunities are, okay? It's all new, and anybody can dive in there with their web scale and Kubernetes and REST interfaces and those sort of things, okay? It's all open again, all up in the air. Okay, so that comes to a close. Thank you for attending and taking questions.
Thanks very much, Paul. This is where we kind of throw open to the floor for about 10 minutes, but Paul will be hanging about with some of his colleagues after 9 o'clock as well. If there's any quick questions that anybody has got.
Yeah.
Simon Pascal, CEO of Acquoia. One thing you didn't mention in your presentation is the ability with new 5G networks to quite literally split up the relationship between data and the computation.
It was there. It was on the last slide. But I didn't cover it out.
Making sure it doesn't run amok, because that's where the latency gets out of control when it's done at scale. How do organizations at scale rein that in and implement some degree of controls?
Well, Google, like 2 billion containers under control, right? And that's quite responsive. So, yeah, this has to be managed, as always, right? Your latency and the way you deploy in this network has to be controlled. But I'd say that's up for as we get more experience of deploying, okay? Yes, we do have these problems, right? When you deploy in private clouds, you do have problems of other apps taking on eating your CPU lunch, right? That can happen. So we've got to build the networks. And this is where things like slicing and policy come in. You've got to guarantee Bandwidth, you've got to guarantee CPU for your applications, okay? And that's part of the environment. So it's a work in progress. I mean, the first part of latency, right, is getting the apps as near to the user as possible. Because obviously distance introduces latency. But then, yeah, then you're talking about guaranteeing computation to those apps in the cloud networks. And things like Kubernetes does it, right? It looks at the usage of the containers and will give those containers more CPU when it needs it, scales them up, scales them down. And that's part of the solution. But I say it's a work in progress and still needs to be developed further, yeah. I mean, there's boxes here, right, that kind of manages that aspect in 5G, okay? In terms of like slicing control and working with the underlying container orchestration system like Kubernetes to ensure they're getting the CPU they need to guarantee responsive times. But yeah, it's up there.
Anybody else?
Chris Hadwell, Business Security. What incentive are the players to bring that hosting and that compute capability closer to the edge? Sorry, what are the incentives for the various different players in the business to bring that computing, hosting, and that flexible capabilities closer to the edge?
Yeah, okay.
Well, if you can just repeat the question.
Yeah, so is it Chris? Yeah, Chris has asked what incentives are there to bring, for the hosting companies, to bring things to the edge, okay? Right, this is topical for me because, yeah, why is Google or why is Azure going to bring a center here, okay? Now, Amazon actually does have the answer there because they have something called Outpost. So if you have if you want to say to them, okay, we're going to use your computation for an application on the edge, they would deploy Outpost, right? And you can put that in any machine room, and that's still managed by Amazon. Okay, so and we'll probably see more of that coming in. If somebody says, okay, I have my factory here, and I want to use industrial control, but the latency, because the thing's hosted on Amazon or Azure, hundreds of miles away, somebody's going to have to pay to bring it closer, right? And that's where the business model would be. I mean, yeah, low latency isn't going to come for free. You're going to have to pay for it by bringing the computation closer to where you need it. And yeah, we are, I mean, Amazon Outpost, look at that, right? That's a way of deploying near the edge. And I think they are seeing that. They understand you need to start deploying closer. It's no good having a data center stuck in the middle of the country for these kind of applications, right? And that's what it's all about, okay? Yeah.
Well, maybe just one last question, if anybody's got anything. If not, it means that I've got the last question. I'm looking at the gallery. I suppose my last question isn't so much technical as political, and is there a real step change in 5G from 4G for the amount of money it's going to cost the UK to actually scale up from 4 to 5?
Well, I say if you're going to go into the politics of this, at the moment, where do you get all your networks from, right? Should there be a UK-based, vendor supplying these networks, replacing the companies being talked about? And where they get the money comes from the consumer. It always comes from the consumer, right? So that's paying our £30, £40 a month ARPU. That people have so much free money, and you've got to work out how much free money you're going to take from people, right? And they've got to be creative in the way they put out applications. And the same thing was with 3G, right? People, well, maybe they paid too much, but on the Spectrum auctions, what are they going to do with all this stuff? And then the smartphone came along, okay? They did find a use for all this bandwidth, 3G, 4G, and I feel the same thing will happen with 5G, right? Because there are opportunities, but I think people aren't aware of the opportunities yet, right? There is the low latency aspects. When we have more deployment of 5G, then you'll have a kind of a secondary industry of people creating the opportunities and creating more revenue. And as with everything, right, if somebody creates an app, application that requires the computation, then they will be paying the vendor, the operators to use the capabilities, right? And that's how they will generate the revenue. Okay.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's like a political answer to a political question.
Yeah.
I still don't know if it was yes or no, but let's run with yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you're talking about network suppliers, then for somebody there's a massive opportunity at the moment, right, to supply the network side of things. I think.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.